Well, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I know a lot of us across Virginia expected to see a major storm over the last couple of days. It sounds like our friends down in Hampton Roads ended up with close to a foot, and I hope everybody's going to be safe. I know Richmond got much less, and in Northern Virginia we just got a dusting. But it also drives home the fact that we're still seeing, levels of destruction. I think about last weekend where we saw in far southwest, again, floods that devastated a number of communities. I've joined with Tim Kaine and Morgan Griffith and trying to urge President Trump to go ahead and quickly declare a disaster area for Tazewell, Buchanan, Dickinson. Let me just see. I think there may have been one other county as well. I apologize if not. But and this is still in Southwest where people are reeling still from Hurricane Helene. Many times I've talked to you all about the absolute devastation I saw. I mean, the Creeper Trail and the little town of Damascus. We got a huge amount of money for that town to rebuild, for the trail to be rebuilt, for the Blue Ridge Parkway to be rebuilt, for Crater Lake and some of the challenges there to get the agriculture money out. But we're not sure that money is flowing right now. And that's why today, Tim Kaine, along with Tom Tillis and Ted Budd from North Carolina, we said, we wrote a letter to the president, again, to say, you got to get this money out. And clearly it is not flowing. We've seen some of the SBA loans funded, but the larger dollars, we don't know if this is part of the freeze that's one day on and one day off, whether this is an effort to kind of undercut communities, candidly, that have been hugely supportive of the president, or whether it's part of the misdirected Elon Musk war on government. But communities are not going to make it unless the federal government comes through with this disaster assistance. And unfortunately, it just doesn't end there. I mean, we saw with some of these storms a lot of power outages. I think we've now seen about $150 million roughly that's been frozen on grid modernization that would be sent to Virginia. Our grid is way outdated. Updating it, it doesn't have anything to do with what is the power generation source. It's about the transmission of our power. Not updating that will literally cost us money in the long term. And the fact that it's been, again, on part of this arbitrary freeze is pretty damn crazy. We've seen economic efforts that I've been working on for years with the governor, with bipartisan groups of state legislators, a couple $100 million for Volvo and Pulaski, $100 million roughly for the Berry Hill facility outside of Danville. They've been working on literally for years. I think around there's another facility in Chester that Topso was going to do an expansion. And this is all somewhat grinding to a halt. I did see that the Volvo plant in Pulaski in Dublin, announced potentially some layoffs. They say it's due to consumer demand, but it's also got to be due to this lack of certainty that when you're not sure whether the federal commitments that have been made and been supported almost all in a bipartisan way are suddenly not worth anything because you've got an unelected crowd of folks, maybe at the direction of President Trump or maybe not, choosing which programs to fund or which ones to put holds on. And you would think anybody with any business experience would realize that if you've geared a project and you're expecting to get funding on X day and then it's thrown into uncertainty, all the rest of your financing oftentimes falls apart. The damage that's being done in real time, and nowhere probably more than in Virginia, is astounding. I think I made mention of the fact that Tim Kaine and I did a teletown hall last week, mostly directed at Northern Virginia. We would normally get about 3 to 5,000, 6,000 folks. We had 71,000 people. 60,000 stayed on for the whole hour to ask questions. And there's not a day that goes by, and I'm sure most of the press corps, you've got friends or colleagues or otherwise, are seeing projects halted, funding eliminated, people fired. I mean, we've now seen the Doge crowd in at CISA, which is our cybersecurity agency, and the fact that they are laying off everybody that's potentially within the last 2 years of hire. CISA is a new agency. Oftentimes you want these young, high-tech cybersecurity experts. Willy-nilly, they're getting fired. This is not making our country safer. On the intelligence side, and this is where my head is literally exploding, and I pride myself on being bipartisan, but if our Republican friends don't stand up when I know that some of these Doge punk kids are potentially either with malfeasance or ignorance getting access to classified information. We've already seen things like information about the National Reconnaissance Office, which is headquartered in Virginia, that classified information released. We've seen a couple hundred CIA new hires. It takes almost a year to get a classification clearance and then another year to get trained. That information being put out into the public or put out on an unsecure transmission that literally we had their name and first initial or the last name. With AI and knowing where that person published it, you can find out those identities. Many of those folks I think will probably have to, or probably can never go undercover and can't be operational. That is a huge hit, again, towards cost. And then just yesterday we were having a hearing on counterintelligence. Well, this new administration, the Trump administration, has already disbanded the Foreign Malign Influence Center. It has said the FARA legislation, which is basically the law that prevents a foreign government from paying you. If you're going to get paid, you've got to report that. You may remember, first Trump administration guy named Paul Manafort, who was getting paid by a number of folks, Eastern European, including Russia. Well, the Attorney General said they're going to only administer that law selectively. What does that mean? Does that mean that people can be paid off by our adversaries, Iran, China, Russia, and not report it? Or to even kind of add further insult to injury, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act that, yes, says, American companies shouldn't bribe their way to get contracts. One of the reasons why American companies do well abroad. Well, President arbitrarily said he's not going to enforce that anymore. And what does that mean? Well, it means that a foreign company maybe didn't ask for a bribe. Maybe they asked to meet a particular senator or congressman. I know I spend an awful lot of time with the intelligence community these days, but this is making our country less safe. And we've got to have bipartisan condemnation of these actions. For today, you're getting me at the front end of what is going to be a long, long, long day. We do the so-called vote-a-rama. This is where the Senate Republicans, without any input from the Democrats, have basically said, okay, let's add $300 billion around defense or immigration. Some of those areas I might be supportive of, but they don't tell us at all how they'll pay for it. And if we've seen anything, we've seen from the House budget proposals and efforts that would dramatically slash Medicaid, dramatically slash a number of other government services, even though the president says, don't worry, those aren't being touched. Well, I've never seen as much lack of consistent information from a new administration as this one. So the vote-a-rama tonight is this effort where we will probably be unsuccessful on most of these amendments, but we will force Republicans to take votes because, and I say this as somebody who celebrates Americans who've been successful, but what it appears to me is that this effort is about slashing government, not to save money, but to pay for tax breaks for the wealthiest in our country. Frankly, tax breaks that I've not heard a great yearning from business leaders that I work with. This is at a level that has never been seen in our country before. And I know soon we'll see people start to stand up and speak out. I think it will probably start with local elected officials who will say, hey, my community health center's been shut down, or what happened to those 1,000 jobs I was going to get in the South Side. But more efficiency for the government, count me in. Ignorantly eliminating agencies that sometimes they don't even know what they do is chaos on steroids. I mean, the example recently where they tried to fire at the Department of Energy some of the folks who take care and keep safe are nukes. It's hard to believe that some of this is happening in the United States of America in 2025. But tonight I will be a lot with my colleagues trying to, really ask my Republican friends, hey, do you really want to so move all of this power to an unelected individual in Musk and his crowd who we can't even get notification of where they got security clearances? Do you really think we ought to be slashing these services that people depend on so the wealthiest billionaires in America can make more? Do we really think that some of the exposure doesn't end up helping some private interest over others? This has a rank smell of corruption that's permeating a lot of these actions. I met with some of the, we've got a growing space industry in Virginia, and a lot of activity at Wallops. A lot of the companies that are operating out of there, I asked them, aren't you concerned that if Elon Musk and SpaceX can get access to all your contract information as well as private information, how is that ever going to be a fair competition going forward? So I'm obviously more than a little bit riled up, and it's going to be a long night and it's going to be a long fight, but I'm in it for the duration because we've got too much good in Virginia and too much good in our country not to stand up and fight for. So with that, Rachel, and I know Rachel's usually in here with me, but some of our folks are traveling this week, so Rachel, I think you're going to throw the calls to me.
That's right, and our first question will be from Mitchell Miller with WTOP.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for joining us. We've talked many times over the years about your concerns about foreign interference in U.S. elections from Russia and other countries. The New York Times is reporting today that the administration has reassigned or forced out dozens of government employees who had been working to fight foreign interference at places, as you mentioned earlier, about CISA, as well as the FBI that were involved in the Russia investigation. I wonder if I could get your reaction to that.
I'm astonished. The fact that the Foreign Malign Influence Center at Department of Justice has been shut down. Who really believes, does anyone really believe, that China and Russia and Iran and North Korea don't see this as an opportunity to actually meddle more? The insanity of saying, okay, we're going to arbitrarily decide who we want to enforce the law about foreign payments. It means that you suddenly could have foreign governments paying lobbyists or paying administration figures, not even having it reported. You could have American companies that have, frankly, I've not heard anyone on the American corporate side say, gosh, we know we got to play by the rules and not actually bribe other countries, but saying we're going to get rid of that, well, that would allow the sleaziest behavior possible. We hold ourselves to a bigger standard, but not under this administration. And again, I don't know if the President of the United States has actually even ever been briefed by his own intelligence community about who started the war in Ukraine. I do know this, that it was Vladimir Putin, that he is the aggressor, that pulling the rug out from underneath our Ukrainian allies does enormous damage to us, not only in Ukraine, but in terms of the confidence that not just our European allies, but allies around the world have. And you know who loves that? Vladimir Putin in Russia and President Xi in China. And I will bet you that they will ramp up their efforts because it appears like America is disarming itself to try to push back on this information. Let's face it, when the Vice President of the United States goes to Germany, visits Dachau, then lectures the Germans on how they ought to change their law, ignoring the consequences of World War II, and subsequently meets with the farthest right neo-Nazi party. I've never seen that in my lifetime. And having been in Munich during that period, there are going to be a whole lot of folks around the world who's going to, whether they will ever trust us again. And again, who does that benefit? It benefits our adversaries.
Our next question will be for Susan Cameron from the Cardinal.
Hi, Senator. I saw the letter that you signed off on about the public lands Helene relief money. I just wanted to ask you specifically about the Creeper Trail money. Do you know the status of that, and is there some worry that it's been frozen?
Listen, we got, I think we ended up with close to $600 million for the Creeper Trail. It's a very generous amount, and we've got to really rebuild. I think 18 of the 35 railroad ties were completely washed away. Damascus depends upon the Creeper Trail. 200,000 people visit. It's not just Damascus. A lot of the folks start in Abingdon. And yes, we got a real question if that money is delayed. Now, is it delayed because of the freeze? Is it delayed just because this new bureaucracy is not bringing efficiency because they fire people that are supposed to process these requests? We can't get information. And it's not just us. So that's why our North Carolina partners, Republican senators, are launching this letter as well. If there is nothing efficient about this crowd's operations. If anything, the amount of money wasted by starting and stopping projects, anybody in the business world knows that's the case. And I would be very, anxious to see. I think Washington County, where the Creeper Trail's in, I believe voted for President Trump at about 70%. I'd like to have those folks, ask, why are you slowing down the money that it took too long to get, but is the only way they'll be able to rebuild their economy. So I am very worried that this is either part of this on and off freeze or just a completely screwed up bureaucracy that now has eliminated people and can't do its job.
Hello, Senator. I wanted to know about the BEAD funding and whether that funding has actually already been allocated to the states, and if you see that funding or any other issues arising that could derail efforts for rural broadband.
As Virginia is ahead of most states because former Governor Northam put aside $500 million of COVID money, and I got a Treasury program that got us another roughly $20 million. We have been spending that money. In addition, and the Biden administration took way too long on the BEAD funding. That's close to $62 billion that was going to go out to build out broadband. Let me be the first to acknowledge they were slow as molasses getting that money out. Virginia was supposed to get about $1.4 billion. We did extraordinarily well. But yes, we don't know the future of that money. We don't know if it's going to be swept back. And in communities that have been waiting too long to get broadband, I hope they call particularly if their representatives happens to be a Republican member, and ask them, what's the deal here? Because these projects, you got to find somebody to deploy the cable, you got to hire the folks, you got to build out the network. You get that project started and then the federal funding that's expected doesn't arrive. You can just have those projects stop literally dead in their tracks. People will disperse and they end up, even if the money does come back, it'll cost oftentimes twice as much.
Our next question will be Bill Atkinson with the Progress Index.
Senator, thank you for taking this time to speak with us this afternoon. I have a very quick question for a change. Now that Postmaster General Louis Pajoy has announced his plans to step down, what are your thoughts on how his departure will affect or could affect continued reconciliation of the post and delivery problems?
Yeah, great.
In Petersburg, Richmond, and Virginia?
Well, Bill, that's not a simple question. Listen, I went from protesting against Mr. DeJoy to actually I think many, including the Biden appointees, including the union representatives, who felt that DeJoy was trying to fix the enterprise. And obviously there were screw-ups. What happened in Richmond to roll out that new initiative, and we were the guinea pig, and we had some of the worst mail delivery for a number of months. That was totally unacceptable. But the post office last quarter actually made money. And we have an enterprise that, the old model where people send a lot of class 1 mail has disappeared. And I thought, actually, with screw-ups and with mistakes, but overall the enterprise was moving in the right direction. And I am horribly afraid that whatever progress on redeveloping a better business plan and bringing some more efficiencies, could be completely politicized now. I've heard, comments about privatization. I would have taken, DeJoy with all his challenges was still transparent, answered all the delegation's calls, met with us, didn't try to punt when there was a problem. And I am horribly afraid that you could get some political hack in there that doesn't know one thing about operations and could, frankly undermine the one piece of our whole government was actually stated in the Constitution, the Postal Service.
Our next question will be from Mike Gooding with WVEC.
Hi there, Senator. So last night, DOD published a statement that Hegseth has called for 8% cuts that will total about $50 billion at the Pentagon. The targets appear to be, among them, what the release said, so-called climate change and other woke programs. About the climate part of it, down here at Naval Station Norfolk, they've been fighting sea level rise for years. So if the sailors of 68 ships can't get to their 68 ships because the roads are underwater, does cutting climate change make sense?
It absolutely doesn't make sense. And you can, again, ask anybody in Hampton Roads. We spend tens of millions of dollars virtually every year trying to raise the piers because of sea level rise. Now, to deny that fact, whether you want to call it climate change or magic or anything else, doesn't really matter if at the end of the day, the facts are you got to spend the money to make sure that we don't make our ships vulnerable. And as you said, our sailors and civilian employees can get to those ships. This is the kind of, the opposite over-the-top politicization of the one area that I thought was above politics, the Defense Department. But I don't think that's the case. I increasingly worry about the security of so much of our classified information. I got to believe shortly that more of my colleagues will stand up and step up. But so far, it's been crickets. And it'll be very interesting to see this argument that, Lindsey Graham, for example, is making tonight that we need to add $150 billion of new spending to DOD. At the same time, they're trying to cut $50 billion a year. And have they shown us a plan? No. How are we going to make sure that I've been working closely with the shipyards. How do we make sure the shipyards has the personnel they need? Well, I'm sure paying and training workers will probably be something that this administration won't like. I'm imploring the community in Hampton Roads who rely upon the Navy and think this is critical to our nation's defense. If there's a plan, fine. I've seen no plan other than an arbitrary, mostly mean-spirited attack against anything that came before.
Our next question will be Atra El-Nashar with Sinclair.
Thanks, Senator. Back to Ukraine. I'm hoping you can react to a quote from National Security Advisor Mike Waltz this morning. He told Zelensky, or his message to Zelensky was, let's tone down the rhetoric and sign the economic opportunity, sign the deal, referring to, I'm sure, the offer the Trump administration made that the U.S. have 50% stake in Ukraine's rare earth minerals. What do you make of Waltz telling him to tone down the rhetoric? And
I would say that, when the President of the United States basically takes Putin's version of how the war started, when the President of the United States undermines the credibility of a nation that we and our European friends have spent $130 billion, $140 billion of resources to fight back against Russian aggression. It's pretty astonishing. And as somebody that was in Munich and with my Republican friends aghast at what was being said, listen, I think Ukraine is open to some negotiations on some of their minerals. But the idea that you're going to be, at the very moment that you're being undermined by your biggest ally by taking away negotiating points, you're going to be forced to sign a deal with no negotiation in terms of your mineral rights. The fact is, Zelensky is a president of a democratically elected, and I believe with higher approval ratings than Donald Trump. He would be run out of office on a rail, and rightfully should be, if he were to sign that type of an agreement without any negotiation, without any assurances that in these negotiations over his country's future, that they're going to have a seat at the table.
And our final question will be Amy Knowles with the Dogwood.
Hey, Senator Warner, thanks for taking our questions. You mentioned at the start about Southwest Virginia flooding, both from Helene and the recent precipitation. And you talked some about what's happening on the federal level, but I know you also visit the area when you can and connect with a lot of people over that way. So with you being familiar with the area and the needs, what are some ways that the average Virginian could be most helpful in a situation like this?
Well, one of the things, Virginians are really generous. And Southwest Virginians are so proud, and rightfully proud, of the fact they always pull themselves up by the bootstraps. And I think about particularly the folks in Buchanan County, where this is about the third or fourth time, and where people have been flooded out. Some of this, again, is because some of the runoff off of these mountains, because of frankly, the logging roads, there's not been enough kind of mitigation done, and the water rushes down, overflows the creeks, and people in the creek bed gets washed out. Again, we can call it climate change, or we can call it whatever you want, too much rain, but to not have our government stand behind our communities, this is why you pay taxes, so that FEMA can be there, because you can't rely on the community alone. I know I've given money to personally to the foundation around, the Creeper Trail. I do think there are some community-wide, United Ways have always done a great job. But you just can't have some of these same counties. I think I forgot to maybe mention Russell County. I think it was also in the disaster declaration. Pummeling again and again and again. It's one of the reasons why, if we don't get that multiple billions of dollars that we have targeted to us to deal with Helene, some of that will be able to help rectify, because there's a broad base of counties that were designated in the disaster declaration. We're not going to be able to rebuild to better than where it was before. But to all of those communities, but Buchanan and Dickinson have been hit really, really hard. And, but again, I hope that if people have got the ability, if they can chip in a little bit more, but we shouldn't have to rely entirely on private donations. This is why you pay taxes, so that we can be there for each other in moments of need. And it is just beyond belief to me if these dollars, as it appears, are being held up for political reasons.
Senator, that was our final question.
Thanks, everybody.